All right, let's get started. Good evening, everyone, and welcome. I'm Maria Bealta, Dean of the School of Landscape Architecture here at the Boston Architectural College, where we offer interdisciplinary programs in landscape architecture, interior architecture, and design studies. Tonight, it is my pleasure to introduce the BAC's third lecturer, David Walker, in the student-sponsored Atelier lecture series of fall 2015, Latitudes. I want to thank the Atelier student representatives, Rand Lemley and Luca Townsend, for their help and hard work in making this lecture series possible. David Walker is a design partner with over 30 years of experience working closely with Peter Walker, where the two make up an extraordinary father and son team of brilliant 21st century landscape architects. He is fellow of the American Society of Landscape Architects and the recipient of numerous design awards. David has led projects of different geographies, magnitude, and moods. He has spent the last 15 years leading many of the large international projects in the firm. Recent projects include Barangaroo in Sydney, the Novartis headquarters in Basel, Switzerland, Samsung Electronic headquarters in Seoul, Korea, and notably the National 9/11 Memorial in New York City. This memorial is an outstanding project that carries with it a poignant program. A few years ago, of course, I took my students to see this work in New York. When we looked around and when we looked down, the vast scale and depth was incredibly powerful. There, we were confronted with the great absence and with the new sublime. Because the clarity and persistence of his vision are so strong, and because his attention to detail is flawless, without distraction, one experiences the fullness of the moment. Please extend a warm welcome to David Walker as he presents his lecture entitled Landscape Infrastructure, Transformation of Urban Centers. Thank you.
Thanks. Hi, everybody. Thanks for a big turnout tonight. It's great to be here. Well, I'm not going to spend too much time on the memorial because it's actually a fairly old project now, but I'll touch on it a little bit. That's a whole lecture in itself. But I did want to give you a little bit of more information about our firm. We're a firm of about 45 people, mostly landscape architects in Berkeley, California. Our portfolio of work demonstrates our ability to work on large, complex sites. We work with world-renowned architects and corporate and government clients, developing clear design strategies that can succeed over an extended often long planning and construction process. We don't have a sophisticated marketing strategy. Rather, we rely on our past work's experience to create a positive design outcome that's unique to each project and unique site. Our primary goal as designers lies in the success of the built work in that regard. And the focus of this evening's talk will be to show some of the recent portfolio comprised of many technology-based campuses that we do in California mostly, as well as the one in Switzerland, which I'll speak more about. And some urban examples, because we think of urban campuses as important as the sort of high-tech green traditional campuses that are being built for the high-tech world right now. I'll then focus on the project that I'm most excited about because it just was completed it was completed in August, and it's called Barangaroo, and it's in Sydney, Australia. And it's one of the largest urban renewal projects that we've ever undertaken. We've been working for the past 6 years to transform Sydney's old container port into a new harbor site, mixed-use urban center for the 21st century, which is crucial in positioning Sydney, the city of Sydney, competitively with Hong Kong and Singapore in the Asian Pacific region. So I'll start off with an image of our office, as you can see here. Again, I said we're about 45 people and maybe 25 landscape architects, and it was really important to us that we find a space large enough where we could be in one space, where we could all hear what each other's projects are all about, and the conversations could be heard by people that weren't even working on the projects. And that way we were able to keep the design tight, close and controlled, and we could rely on each other's resources in that regard. People who knew about different things, they were just in talking distance to each other. So this is the main space that we work in. You can see we've got all our computers and desks on one side, and then on the right side we've got these bays that we use that is all wall space. And what we like to do is we like to set up all of our drawings, contrary to the way the world is going, where everything is computerized and inside a box somewhere. We like to track our projects that last a long time, take a long time to construct. We like to track the whole projects on these walls and get a kind of, thereby being able to get a kind of perspective on the project as it goes. We can add new information as it comes, and that way we think we end up with a better product because it's not all hidden inside a computer. So Maria mentioned the World Trade Center Memorial. It's probably what we're most famous for, and it's most famous, of course, for the two pools that are 200-foot square that mark where the World Trade Center towers used to stand. But it's also important to talk about the context that it sits in. The site is completely planted in the swamp white oaks, and they run all around the two pools, therefore creating a kind of context that they can sit in. This is one of the earliest sketches, and it's a really very simple plan that I think was very helpful in being able to navigate the politics and all of the stakeholders in the project over about a decade period. And the design is really, the design is really simple because it's essentially lines of trees that all line up in the east-west direction this way, and then they're randomly sliding on that path so that you can't see, the trees don't line up in this direction. And that was one of the earlier models. And this is what I mean by that. You can see in the east-west direction, pushing the wrong buttons. In the east-west direction, down here, they're all lined up, so they create these kind of allées facing west or east. And then when you turn the other direction, they become a random forest. Very simple idea, but it's a very powerful idea that I think succeeded in the end. Here you can see the trees lined up looking west. And here you can see this nighttime shot where, looking in the opposite direction, it becomes a forest of random placed trees. So of course, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this particular project, but one of the most important things, technical aspects of the project, is this system of rainwater collection, where we're collecting all the water in these drainage slots that happen between the trees here. And it goes down into a chamber that collects all the water, sends it down to a tank, big storage tank, and then it's recycled back up into the rather sophisticated tree zone here to replant it. So all it's zero. It needs no water, no additional water. A couple of the earlier projects I want to show just briefly. This is in the Pearl District in Portland, Oregon. We won a master plan to create for the redevelopment of this whole area, which was railroad yards in the north end of Portland. And the idea was to take this very important street here, which they were planning to run a light rail down the center, and make it an important binder that connects three important squares. So we won the master plan of these squares that led out to the river. And then we also got to build this particular square, which is called Jameson Square, and that's this first square here. All these blocks were developing from the south, heading towards the north. So each park was ultimately done by a different landscape architect, but we did the first one. And the reason I like to throw this one in is because it's many years before we worked on the Barangaroo project, and I think you'll see what I mean when I get to that at the end. Because we used large granite blocks in this particular instance to create a pool that's a tidal pool. And the pool, the water flows out of what was called Tanner Spring on this site originally. So the water pours out of the stone wall and fills up a basin every 15 minutes. And so it becomes a kind of tidal pool for kids to play in. We didn't realize it was going to be Portland's favorite pool for small children because the height of the water never was higher than 12 inches. And so it became a huge magnet for small children, and they use it like a beach in the middle of the city. We also do a lot of high-tech campuses. As I mentioned, one of our earlier works around 2000 was working for Steve Jobs on the Pixar campus in Emeryville, which was essentially, which is essentially a animation studio, parking, and then a great private park for the employees that takes up this area. And so we set out the landscape based on this alley that runs the whole length, and then more naturalistic spaces on either side. An amphitheater for the whole company, 600 people at the time. I think it's now probably 1,200 people. And the kind of green spaces that we created off of this alley with the animation studios behind. All of these spaces were created in order to, Steve Jobs' idea was to create a campus that would tend to keep people on the campus as long as possible. And so he created a huge amount of amenities. They had swimming pools, soccer fields, etc. The other urban campus I wanted to highlight was the Sony Center in Berlin, which we did also around the same time with Helmut Jahn. And we created the main space that sits at the bottom of his great tent structure. And we created a pool at the bottom of it that's a cantilevered glass reflecting pool that you look up from the theaters, the 10-theater Metroplex below subgrade and up into the space. And that looks like that. It's like a big piece of jewelry that's been laid out and just happened to cantilever over the edge of that opening. The pavements were pretty interesting at the time. We used German cobblestone in these stripe patterns. And this is the traditional German cobblestone laid in a random way, alternating with stainless steel panels. Most recently, a campus for VMware headquarters in Palo Alto, 60 acres, a site that actually my father designed in the 60s, and then it reached its final life, and I had the opportunity to look at it again, and he said, "Oh, you just do it. I can't bear to see you tear that thing down and redo it." So we redid the whole thing. We tore out most of the buildings except for these buildings, and then we relaid out a whole bunch of new buildings, and then basically created a campus of quads made it a pedestrian oriented space. Well, the main thing that we did was we took all the surface parking lots and put them into these big parking garages so that the cars were immediately out of the picture. The traditional campus has, acres of parking surrounding buildings typically, like the earlier campus here. You see the parking here and then the buildings with some small landscape space in between. We did it the other way around. We made the campus completely green. Before we did that, we had to save some of his old trees. We had to move some 90-foot sequoias, which is one of the things that I love about landscape architecture. You always get to do different kinds of activities, and this was a really thrilling one to try to move these things. At first they said you couldn't do it, but obviously they could do it. And then we recreated these spaces at the entrance, and that gives you a kind of flavor of it. A pool that's a cascade pool that's, I think it's 600 feet long, that organizes all the buildings and the circulation space. And that's what that looks like. And now, finally, on the campus front, I wanted to show you Novartis, because it's something that I've been working on for about 16 years now. It's a giant pharmaceutical company in Basel, Switzerland. And it's also right on the border of Germany and France. So it's an incredible opportunity to take a former industrial site that looked like this, where they were manufacturing for 100 years, manufacturing all kinds of chemicals and drugs, and try to figure out how to tear it all down and figure out which pieces to keep, and how to reorganize the thing as a pharmaceutical-only company and build new buildings. Because most of these buildings were obsolete and out of date, no longer useful. And this is what it looked like. It was an industrial site, you know, with railroad tracks running down the middles of the streets, with chemicals stored everywhere along the edges, hardly any trees, just all given up to automobiles and trains and trucks. So this is what it looks like as of a year ago. What we did was we took the main street along here and we organized all the new buildings along that main street. It's a very simple plan. And each of these buildings is being done or has been done by a pretty famous architect. I'll give you an example of that. We've got Swiss architects, we've got Sana from Japan, Taniguchi, Moneo, et cetera, and they've kind of gone through just about every sort of blue chip architect there is. The CEO collects architects and he collects major artworks, as I'll show you. So this is the master plan for 2030, and it essentially took the existing infrastructure that existed, essentially the grid of the streets that existed when the site was originally formed, because the infrastructure existed and it was going to be difficult to build this thing all at once. We've been at it for 16 years, and the infrastructure is an extremely important part of that. So we had to figure out which parts could be phased out or needed to stay forever, and figure out how to do each building as it came along. This is the Rhine River here. This is the border, the international border of France. That's French territory, and this is Switzerland, and then the city of Basel is down here. As I said, the plan's pretty simple. Fabrikstrasse was the traditional main street that ran the whole length, and this is the headquarter building that sat on it. And what we did was we created a south entrance, which is a major park with a two-level parking structure underneath that would park 2,000 cars for the campus. And then up in France, the people in France get to park on the surface. And so we had to create an entrance here and an entrance here. And that's what it used to look like. So how to create a section that would maintain over time as each of these architects would be added. What we did was, with the master planner Vittorio Lampagnani from Milan, we came up with the idea that all the buildings would be 5 stories, and that on Fabrikstrasse there would be an arcade on one side, and on the other side a natural arcade made out of a double line of liriodendrons that ran the whole length and connected all the buildings. So you had 2 kinds of experiences, one that was outdoor and in the landscape, and one that was part of the building experience. The idea behind making a Main Street plan was because at this point they had a cafeteria structure which is where everybody met, and it was a high-rise building. So the chance meetings that would happen among employees would happen in the elevator, which is not a very good place. So the idea was to create, each of these buildings would have a major restaurant in it, or services for the campus, and we were trying to get people out onto this main street and to use the public space for that kind of civic life of the company. So in Swiss fashion, they made everything out of stone. All the sidewalks were made out of this dark stone, and then the streets were made out of white stone from Sardinia. And all the streets were named after scientists in alphabetical order. Fabrikstrasse was the main one, made out of stainless steel inlaid. And this is the character of what that street looks like, with the arcade on the right and the double row of trees on the other side, with the Frank Gehry building in the distance. At the north end, early on in the process, we wanted to create a connection across the international border here for all the people that parked in France. They didn't really have a way in. They had to sort of sneak their way around over here through all the industrial site to get in. So we said, let's build a tunnel, a pedestrian tunnel that connects the two here. And then let's get Richard Serra to do a unique sculpture at one end. And we did. And this is what that section looks like. It's essentially you come down some stairs across underneath a train track that needed to be maintained by the port of Basel in Switzerland. And then you come back up, and then the sculpture is on the other side, and you've entered the campus. So at the time, we had visited Vitra, which is just down the street, and we said, well, could we do some really nice concrete work? And they said, well, yeah, we actually know the guys that did the concrete work for Ando on his building over at Vitra. So we got them over, and they showed us how to do good concrete, and we achieved that. And then the funny part about it is, like 3 years later, Ando was chosen to do a building right next to this. So we were a little bit, surprised about that, and we hoped that he ended up liking it, and he did. But we ended up doing that. And this is the experience walking down, entering the campus through that space. And then you're up into this sculpture. At the southern end, one of the first projects we did was to remodel the 1940s historic headquarters building, Courtyard. So what we did was we created a motif that was a Swiss cross and a circular floating canopy of hornbeams and a grove of Siberian birch. At the southern end, we needed an arrivals plaza, and we call it the Forum. And it was the idea was to take the Münsterplatz in Basel, which was essentially a historic space in front of the church. And we wanted to create a space that was that simple. If we could find trees that were large enough and plant them, that would make the space. So we did. We found these pin oaks up near Amsterdam, and we floated them down on the river and landed them on the site. And we had our instant, Münsterplatz. And it has fabulous fall color, and it's the place where people meet. It's sort of surrounded by all the pharma headquarter people. And of course, the artwork at either end. We've got the Richard Serra on one end and a Jenny Holzer at the other end. Every new building that came onto the project had a major artist associated with it. Great client. Okay, so Barangaroo. This is a project that we started about 6 years ago. We were really lucky to land this one. It just finished about 3 weeks ago. So this part of the lecture is a little bit more about construction, because I've been doing this for a while. But now I've got some of the new final pictures in here that shows what it looks like. So I need to change the lecture around so that it starts with the finished project and then move it. But bear with me on this one, because it's really about the construction of this former container port. So this is our site. It's 22 hectares, and it's right on the western edge of Sydney. This area is what they call the Rocks, and it's where the first fleet landed in Sydney. It's the historic district. And then the downtown grew roughly to the south on this line. The Sydney Opera House was put in the 70s, Harbour Bridge earlier than that. And so there are all these important points, Mrs. Macquarie's Chair, the Botanic Gardens over here. And we had this point to redevelop as a new headland, as well as the development of a major business center for about 22,000 workers. So this is the comparison of the site before, when we first got there, and the master plan for how to develop the site. It's not completely done. What we've done is we've finished this project, and they've completed one building by Richard Rogers over here, and 2 more are going to open next year. The center section isn't complete yet, but these are essentially the 3 parts. The reserve, which is very naturalistic. The central Barangaroo, which is going to be a mixed use, where half of it is open space on the water, but of a more civic nature. And then the other half is going to be lower development, more civic in quality, that relates more to the context of the Rocks. And then the central business district was just going to expand into Barangaroo South, and that's where all the heavy buildings or the tall buildings would go. Great history on this site. We didn't have anything to know how to rebuild a headland, which was part of the brief. This is the earliest known painting that was painted in 1824 by one of the sailors from England, And this is what Barangaroo used to look like. We had old maps that looked like this that showed what the headland was supposed to what the form of the headland originally was supposed to be. And we also had the idea that this was sacred ground for the Aboriginal indigenous culture, along with these other headlands and Goat Island that sits in the middle. So this idea of recreating a headland on the northern edge fell out of former Prime Minister Paul Keating's mind a long time ago, and he was really our champion for getting this done. Here you can see an older map of what Sydney used to look like with Miller's Point on the edge. Great history of industrialization, really, of the site. Miller's Point was a town center at one point, but all those yellow areas were demolished to make way for the shipping wharves and ultimately the container port. So it was really destroyed. In the 20th century, earlier 20th century, it became finger wharves and industrial uses. And the headland itself had been actually taken apart and used for the building blocks to build all the heritage buildings in Sydney. And this shows you what was left. This is the cliff face that's 20 meters tall, and it used to come all the way out here. The other important aspect of this project was that it was the last non-connected part of Sydney's foreshore, this whole area. And so the brief was really to make sure that we had continuous and broad civic access along that waterfront edge. As I mentioned before, the Rocks is the first settlement, and the Central Business District is to the lower part of the slide. And so that's really how we thought about developing the land. All the high-rises would be adjacent to the CBD, and the lower buildings would be north of that line. We studied all the connections back into Sydney. It's a very topographically complicated city, so we had to find ways to connect back across those cliff faces, how to connect the site, and how to make all those connections connect to this continuous line of foreshore that would connect what had not been connected for 100 years. There's our master plan, and so you can see the headland. We created a cove here we call the Northern Cove that separates the headland from the development, so that can become a pure shape. Central Barangaroo that's half landscape and half lower buildings, and then these are the high-rise buildings here. These are being done by Richard Rogers, and this one's being done by Wilkinson Air, and Renzo Piano are doing these three towers. This is some of the early renderings that show what that is going to look like. Quite an urban setting on the south side. Central, as I mentioned, is really a parkland that's going to be heavily programmed for civic uses. Festivals, all kinds of events on the water's edge, more civic in nature than the naturalistic headland. And these are the renderings that we did a year ago that show what that might look like. So this image shows the Northern Cove and the headland, and then that's how we separated the urban part from the more naturalistic part. So the construction of Barangaroo Reserve. Again, back to this image. That was our guiding principle. You know, we really had no photographs or anything to work from. We did have some geologists and that could explain the geomorphology of the typical headlands in Sydney, and that was really useful. And we studied those shapes in our computer models and tried to identify, using this map here that identified the outline of the shape, what that might have looked like. And what we discovered was that headlands are quite steep on the south in Sydney. They're steep to the south and on the western side, and then they become quite gentle and they slope down gradually to the north. So that's the model that we work with. And this is how it was going to fit on the land. We had a lot of engineering feats to try to make this happen, because this was a deep water port with caisson edges that ran the whole length that had to be somehow removed and then have the naturalistic edge put back in along this red line. So we had to figure out how to do that. These were some of the early sort of simple renderings that got people to understand what we were trying to do, basically extending the cliff face of Miller's Point out this way. And there you can see the gentle slope to the north becoming a steeper slope to the south, basically following the clues of the existing cliff face. The other important thing that was part of our brief was to create a cultural space underneath the park. The idea was to make a space that ultimately will become an indigenous cultural center. Right now they don't have the funding for this exactly, but we have the space. And the idea was to make the park really become the facade of the space, of the architecture. There is no real architectural statement here, but the park is the facade. And to make that happen, or make that exciting, rather than just being an underground sort of cave space, we left a slot along the edge of the cliff that allowed sunlight to wash that cliff face the entire length. So how do you build a headland? We looked at the headlands. We spent a lot of time looking at headlands, and the thing that was the most interesting was that when you look at them from outside, they're solid in their plantings, but when you get on the inside, they're quite delicate, and they provide all kinds of views looking out. The steepness of the slope was very important to the natural headlands, and we didn't feel that we could get enough of a headland feeling by using the natural angle of repose at 1 and 3, which is this line right here. So we had to devise a way of making 1 meter tall retaining walls that would steepen that slope and give you more of a sense of what the headlands look like around Sydney. And then we planted those walls so that you couldn't see them. We spent a lot of time on the plant typologies, which change as you move around from south to north. And all along looking to create the character of the existing bushes that are around Sydney, which is what this image shows. However, we're in the middle of a major metropolitan center, so it had to all be done to code, and it needed to be able to be accessible by 10,000 people a day. So we couldn't exactly do this sort of naturalism. A lot of people thought you could at the beginning, but we said we used the term naturalistic rather than natural, and I think that caught on and allowed us to keep going with what we were doing in the middle of the city. So again, here's the plan of the headland, and this represents what we actually built, what we've completed. The cultural space, which is cut through this cross section here, is in this area here, and that's the cliff. Those are the cliff openings that wrap all the way around. There's a 2-level garage underneath all of that, which is where we excavated all the stone to create the new foreshore. And these are some of the early renderings that we used to convince people. The promenade, as you can see in this lower image, was essentially marked by this 1836 wall, which wrapped around the entire foreshore, marking that 1836 line of what the foreshore used to look like. And it was done in an architectural way reminiscent of the early stonemasons of Sydney. So it was more architectural in character. But then the foreshore was made out of these great blocks, and I'll show you what that is. And then the bush was on the other side. This is the northern slope from the water looking back up, and then from the top of the slope looking back down at the Sydney Harbour Bridge. There was some bush. There was a walk that we call the bush walk that runs through the middle of the bush, so you could experience the ecology of the bush landscape as you walk around, sort of mid-level. Then the next problem that nobody had any idea how to do was how do you create a naturalistic foreshore? So again, we went out to the same places and we looked, and instead of looking at the plant ecology, we started looking at the sandstone bases of all these things, and we noticed that these skirts of sandstone, as we call them, were places where fishermen and families and kids and all kinds of people were out and enjoying the foreshore, fishing and doing all kinds of things out there. So we said, well, how do we do that? So luckily, we found, while we were looking at quarries and realizing that things come in block shapes and there's a maximum size that you can get them, we found this place in Sydney that had this natural geological strike angle where the stones actually fell in prehistoric earthquakes and landed in these kind of geometric patterns. And we said, well, that's pretty interesting. We could take these blocks and we could figure out how to do that, maybe. So that's how we began to pursue that. But we said, how could we make these blocks, they look so industrial. How can we make them weathered quickly? So we did some tests with a water jet blasting, and in 10 minutes you can take a square block like that and turn it into a naturalistic block like this. So we thought we really might be able to do this now. So we made some models that showed how you put these blocks together, high tide, low tide, all different kinds of situations. And then that built up to a first prototype that we did on the land, just so that the contractors could figure out how they actually could make this thing and use the equipment to move the blocks around. And then the construction began. So I think this was in August 2013, and we started at the north, and we started making, it took a whole year to rebuild the foreshore all the way around to here, and this is where we started. And you can see in this image that all the stone that was being quarried out of the center of the site was being moved to make the new foreshore along this whole 1 kilometer edge. And that's the car park level of the cultural facility that would be ultimately there. And that's the future cultural facility. We made maquettes, scale stones made out of the actual material, so the guys out with the machines could figure out how do you actually lift these things. They didn't know how to do that safely. And then they started cutting, and this is the most amazing part, was that the way they cut sandstone is with these big machines that have 10-foot diameter blades, 2 of them, and the 2 blades run in one direction, and then they run every 5 meters in this direction, and then they use a kind of a big forklift, and they lift these 5-meter blocks out. And here we are inspecting the first blocks that came out of the site. Eventually that grew into a stockpile that on site that looked like this. And each one of these blocks was designed to fit a specific space. They were all processed on site and then moved 200 meters into place, making it one of the most sustainable kind of operations you could do, because we eliminated thousands of truckloads through the city of Sydney by doing this. And then the construction began. This area we spent a lot of time on because we didn't know how to, they didn't know how to do it, we didn't know how to do it. So we tore it up and redid it twice, because if we got it right the first time, then the rest of it would go easily. And this is what the first bits looked like. It was built behind the caisson so that the wave action of the harbor wouldn't affect the guys in scuba gear. And we thought we had something pretty good, because the whole idea was to make a place where people could get out on the water. There aren't too many foreshores in the world that actually are magnets for people coming right down to the water, and I think that's what we've done for the entire length of this foreshore. And it changes every time you're out there, depending on the tide. So then, after we got through with that first bit, they just show you a couple pictures of how they saw cut the caissons and then lifted them out with these huge barges. And then we had a foreshore that was actually on the harbor. And that's when we really got excited, because we started to see the wave action and the tidal fluctuation happening on the edge. And then planting the edge, which really added a lot to it. We had pre-grown a lot of these trees. These were actually some big specimens, but all the 75,000 plants and trees were pre-grown 2 years before they were needed, up in a nursery up north, and then brought down. And this is 1 year's growth, because it took 3 years to build. We had the opportunity to build, we had to start on the north and work our way. And so these were planted for 1 year during the construction, and they took off like crazy. We had a great soil scientist who made sure the new soils that we put in were fantastic. And it really showed, because the trees doubled in size in a year. Meanwhile, we're busy doing tons of prototypes for the 1836 wall. You can see up on the top here, one of the first prototypes, and then some prototypes in place, and then the final first bits. So this was tremendously exciting to get down there and work with some really expert stonemasons. How to do the Amphitheater Shoreline, which was a more architectural, civic quality foreshore edge. This is just a prototype of what that looks like. To the rock outcroppings that would happen up on the headland. How do we do an artificial rock outcropping, if you will? I mean, we had trouble with that idea just in itself, but well, so we did it anyway. But we also did some that were not so naturalistic, which got us in trouble, actually. These got us in trouble because they had a Celtic reference, and that was not so great for the Aboriginal Council. But we think we got them to agree to it. We built some fantastic staircases that ran up the side of the bush that were made out of sandstone, heritage grade sandstone, and then flanked with the same blocks that we used on the foreshore, running up the side of the headland. The cultural center was starting to take shape. This is the way you enter in your automobile when you're heading into the car park from the north. Again, the cliff face exposed to the space as it's formulating. The walls, the car park's below this now, so they're getting ready to put the roof over, and then the park would go over the top of that. Here you can see the headland rising up against the shape of the cultural facility below. Northern Cove, quite advanced, shot from the north. And then in December of 2014, they finished the roof, and then the park just went like crazy for 8 months, the last 8 months, and they finished it up really fast as soon as they got this major piece of infrastructure complete. And that's what it looks like from the inside. Cliff face is exposed that whole length. The Foreshore Walk coming along. You can see some of the blocks. Lots of different experiences along the foreshore. We have, the foreshore has places where it goes right down into the water, and then we have places that we call beaches, like here, where people can get out in a green area next to the water, like this. The Northern Cove, and you can see the development of Barangaroo South happening at the same time down here. There's a huge pier, a big pier that sticks out in the Northern Cove that's designed for events. And this Northern Cove has about a 2,000 person capacity to enjoy those events. We have an elevator that takes you from the top of the headland all the way down through the cultural facility and connects all the levels and creates the accessibility at the northern end, or the southern end. So this is a shot that basically shows how we use that geologic strike angle of those images that I first showed you, where everything is running in one geologic direction. And this is our northern foreshore. And then here's some of the finished work from last week, what those edges look like along the harbor. And you can see how people are starting to get down onto the rocks and get close to the water. One of the last things that we did, again, this is sort of a story about sandstone. So one of the last great things that I got to experience was the creation of these entry markers. And by this time, all the guys working on the job were so excited about it that they were really putting out. And so they said, well, yeah, you need a 1 meter by 1 meter by 6 meter set of 3 columns. Sure, we can do that. So they scratched their heads, but they figured out how to do it. And then they had to figure out how to move it. And then they had to figure out how to put it upright. But all along, they were so proud of the challenge. I mean, nobody really knew whether they could do this. And that's what those entry columns look like at the edge of the city. And here's what it looks like entering into the park. And these are some of the finished works here. Northern Cove. Here you can see all the layers from the top of the headland looking down at the bushwalk, which has a corten wall that runs its entirety, and then the promenade and the water. These were from the opening. Second day it was raining, so there were not a lot of people out there. And then we created all kinds of access through the bush landscape so that people could walk up and through it, including our grand staircase. This is the Northern Cove. Again, thousands of ways to enjoy this foreshore because every combination of stone is different with planting. I think everybody will find their favorite spot to enjoy Sydney Harbor. So what's interesting is in the last couple of weeks, they're throwing a whole series of parties in Sydney, and they're getting tens of thousands of people out to enjoy this thing. And they're having all kinds of events. They've got yoga events up on the top of the bluff. They've got just people out everywhere. They're holding parties and ceremonies with their Aboriginal council, fireworks, cultural space events. They had an event at nighttime with a whole bunch of different dancing groups. And every now and then you'll see a few Aborigines running around. I don't know if they're real, but they but they're there just for your entertainment, I guess. And I'll leave you with these last couple of shots. This is sort of the before and after from the 3-year journey to construct this thing. From a rectangular deep water container port to something that's naturalistic for the people of Sydney. And it was quite a transformation. And that's Barangaroo. I hope you can all go to Sydney someday and see it. That's it.
Thank you very much. I hope this is on.
Yep.
We have time for questions. So if you would like to ask a question.
When you guys are working on coastal projects like that, are you guys considering rising tides at all?
Yes, good question. I think everybody's thinking about that now. And I have to say, I don't know where the science actually is coming worldwide. It seems to be developing over the length of this project, but it all tends to be in the 1 meter range additional rise by 2100, which is what people are generally using for development. And so we set all the promenades a meter higher than they would have been, if they were built without sea level rise. And the developers are doing the same thing because, of course, they have to protect their investment and their underground car parks and so forth. So yeah, it's a very important thing to consider. Unfortunately, you think, well, what happens after 2100? But that's all you can do. All you can think about at this point in time. Ironically, parts of the city are lower than that. Like, for instance, the road behind Barangaroo is a meter lower than the foreshore promenade. So the water coming off of the city actually is going down to a lower area than the foreshore, the new foreshore is going to be. So it's kind of a funny thing about what you're protecting. You've got to somehow get the water off of the cities. I think we have the same problem in San Francisco and Boston. You can protect on the new shoreline edges that you do, but what happens, how do you get the water out from back behind? So these are all really interesting problems, and there isn't really great legislature yet that goes across property boundaries, things like that. But I think that we're going to be seeing that certainly developed in our lifetime. We used the Sydney Opera House as the model. They had very good studies for protecting their national monument like that. And so we followed the data that they were using.
I have a question. Could you speak a little bit about how the Cultural Council was part of the process of design?
Well, we didn't really. I think they were consulted. We didn't really consult with them too much. We had public meetings throughout the process, but it wasn't tailored specifically to them. So they were basically brought along the journey, and they tended to believe that they owned it, and because the press that the state government was putting out was very positive in that direction. I was really surprised when the opening happened how powerful that was, because it's going to be very popular that they've done this. And I mentioned that one marker where we did those Celtic stones. that was a real problem. They threatened to cut those down. But we planted some trees in it, as we were planning to do, and made it softer. A lot of the criticism that we had along the way, because this thing was so intensely watched, was because things weren't complete yet. So we had to tell people to just wait, wait until we've got things planted and complete. I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah. Yeah.
It looked like a lot of prototyping and problem solving took place during the construction process. Was that planned, and did that create any difficulties as far as selling the idea to the stakeholders?
Well, that's a good question. The reason there was so much prototyping happening was because when we did the design for the first 2 years with our local partners in Sydney, it was then novated to a general contractor who took all of the design team except for ourselves. The government retained us under their wing to make sure that the design goals were being met. And the rest of the team went over to the contractor side, which made it a little bit difficult because the contractors are there to make money. Luckily, we had a site that was so remarkable in terms of its location on the harbor. And we had an amazing group of expert craftsmen that the momentum started building after the first year, where the prototyping became very important, just to understand how this thing could actually be achieved. And we had really good cooperation in that regard. We couldn't draw all these things, and so the prototyping was a really important part of making sure that could be seen for the outcome. That was all drawn into our documents, that we needed a certain number of prototypes, so it was specified. Anybody else?
Hi. Sorry if I missed this from the lecture, but in your project in Palo Alto, you said that the project had finished, it had reached its final light. What does that mean for a project, for a landscape project?
Oh, this is the VMware campus in Palo Alto. It was formerly it was Syntex, and then it was Roche. So it was a biopharmaceutical company. And the campus had been designed in the 60s, and most of the trees were at the end of their life. My father planted or designed the original campus for them, and he planted a lot of quick-growing trees, redwoods and poplars and that kind of thing, willows. And so most of those things were at the end of their life, their useful life. And so were the buildings. The buildings were outdated, except for a few. And so the only trees that we really had to consider saving were the redwoods and the heritage oaks that were on site. So that's always a tricky thing when you're trying to insert a whole building program into a landscape with a lot of topography and existing trees. That becomes your number one problem, is how do you fit these things in without killing the trees? We had to move some.
Question. How much say do you have in the architecture of the buildings that go around and how they're going to look in the development of your landscape?
I like to have as much as I can. The memorial, we had a lot of say. We were working with Michael Arid, who is a young architect, didn't have a lot of experience, and so we got some experience. We got Davis Brody Bond on the team, and who are seasoned architects, and we like to work very collaboratively with the architects. My favorite collaborations are ones where the landscape has as much say as the architecture. Not as much say, but at least some say about what the final concept would be. So if you're in early, that's what we like to do. That Novartis campus, that tunnel that we designed underneath, next to the future Ondo building, we designed that whole thing ourselves. We've done some architecture, but we're not really allowed to do architecture. We're not trained as architects. So when we work overseas, we have better luck at this, because then you can break all the rules.
Hi. My question is regarding the 9/11 memorial. You said you had swamp white oaks planted there. Was there a particular reason for that type of species?
Yes.
Good.
Well, as you can imagine, I think it's 300 and something oaks or trees, and we wanted it one species because it needed to be, it needed to have that cathedral-like character, and it needed to have a context that would set those pools. And so I think if you did, a whole bunch of different species, it would be a lot harder to achieve that. We originally had some liriodendrons in the open grove where the lawn is, but those were ultimately decided that they shouldn't happen. So it all ended up being the swamp white oak. How we ended up with the swamp white oak was a long story. We must have talked to everybody in New York. We talked to the Botanic Gardens, we talked to Battery Park City, all the experts that we could find, and people within the city as well. And there isn't a tree that will pass everybody's tests, but except maybe Gladitsia. But the swamp white oaks were the best one. We were building that forum at Novartis with those pin oaks, and we thought that's the look that we want. If we could use pin oaks, that would be great. But that had a slightly more difficult situation. The swamp white oaks were a little stronger for the future.
David, thank you for a wonderful lecture, and I do have a follow-up question to your comment about getting in early with the architects. In your opinion, do you think there is a shift occurring in the discussions and in the dialogue of these collaborations?
I'm not sure that there's a shift. I'm not sure that there is a shift, actually. I think architects are moving into this realm a lot more, the landscape realm a lot more. And a lot of them, as you know, a lot of the firms in the country are consolidating into giant firms. And a lot of the firms are becoming more and more multidisciplinary. So a landscape firm like ourselves, which is sort of a boutique firm of 45 people, we're sort of an anachronism now. There aren't, most of the firms are really large now or smaller. And I think it's going to be harder in the future to get in early. I think we've been successful with our portfolio, our successes, and that's the way we sell our work, is what the outcome is. So people see that and they realize that maybe they can't do it themselves. The architects realize they can't do it themselves. We're always trying to share the fee, with them.
Thanks so much for showing these amazing transformations. Everyone, please.
Thank you. Thanks.